Now here's the part you've been waiting for, dealing with misbehavior. As we mentioned earlier, we have the doing great and refocus system with younger students and just general verbal feedback for older students. Additionally, for all ages, there should be some mini privileges given for good behavior, such as more interesting projects and activities. You may want to even plan 2 ways to teach the material. If the students are out of hand, they can be assigned worksheets, which is obviously not the most effective way to learn material, but it does teach the students about natural consequences of their actions. So for the warnings, students should be given a warning for the first infraction, and that first warning should be recorded in the grade book. The second time it happens, the student is asked to stay at the end of class to speak to you. After class, try to troubleshoot with the student. What was he really trying to say? Begin by letting the student know that you know they weren't trying to be bad, but they had a message that they wanted to convey and it got frustrated. So for example, if a high school girl talks a lot in class and ignores warnings, you may want to talk to her after class, ask her why she decided to ignore you. Just not being able to leave at the same time as their classmates is a natural consequence too. Tell her you just want her to enjoy class, and you could tell something must have been bothering her. She might say something like, I feel like you always pick on me. You call on me for all the hard answers. Whatever it is, then review with the student a more productive way to get her message across. Tell her you're totally open to hearing from her, and that is the best way to get the right response that she's looking for. Please note, that doesn't mean you agree with the student's assessment of the problem. There are plenty of times when the student is upset at a perceived slight, but you know that ultimately you have a reason for doing whatever you did. So do not apologize if this is the case. Let the student know that you understand their frustration and then explain that you've decided to do things a particular way for a reason which you may or may not explain to them. But if you sincerely think you made a mistake, then own it, admit it, move on. This happened to me recently. I showed a video to my college students and it contained some offensive language that I hadn't noticed before. The next class, I came in and just said straight to the students that I made a mistake for showing the video and I removed it from their files. Since this was an education course, I also pointed out that as a teacher, they'll always be better off owning up to the mistakes they make. The students know that they did something wrong, and not admitting it doesn't make the problem disappear, it just makes you look stupid. Also remember that if you're giving the student a second warning and they have to come to you after class, that's annoying in and of itself. Remember, for older students, you're using these points as participation points toward their overall grades. As we mentioned, we have the doing great system and the refocus system with younger students and just general verbal feedback with older students. There's a very great way to help students become more self-aware in the future so that they can respond differently to issues that they want to communicate. It's a research-backed method that's been proven to help students, and it could really help anyone with becoming more mindful of how they react. It's called Intervention ABCs. A stands for antecedent, B is for behavior, and C is for consequence. The antecedent is referring to what came before the incident. How was the student provoked? Did the guy behind him stab him in the back with a pencil? The behavior refers to how the student handled the situation. What was the reaction? Did he react by yelling at the guy behind him? C is for consequence. What was the result of the reaction? Discuss how the behavior affected the outcome and how to act in order to achieve a more favorable outcome. Michael Linson has a great tool for students who are just disturbing. Constant talking in class is a super subtle way to get under the teacher's skin. If you are giving the student the second warning and you feel like you need this to really look serious, you can have the student enter observation mode. If you feel it's appropriate, set up a desk at the back of the class and without shaming the student, have them move to that observation desk. There, they won't be allowed to participate in any conversation or discussion and they'll just have to listen quietly to the teacher. For older grades, you may want to do this more subtly by having them remain in their seats and just letting them know that they're in observation mode for 10 minutes or whatever. They return to regular by quietly behaving and following along. After class, of course, you're going to want to strategize with the student to find out why the misbehavior happened and how to change the situation for the future. When you're using the gradebook to track student infractions, it has a dual purpose. The first purpose is to give the students a grade, of course, based on their performance, but the second one is to inform. Meaning, if there's a student who constantly loses points, you'll look at the numbers together with that student. Look at the data. This makes it impersonal. You're not telling them off, it's just a numbers challenge. Challenge the student to decrease the number of infractions. That's going to give your student a goal. And if you think they need it, you can also be in touch with their parents and loop them in by having them give a reward for each decrease. And if you feel the student needs continuous support, the parent can also give the student a reward for a sustained decrease. For older students, the consequence is having points deducted. You can have these points given back to the student for each decrease in infractions. So for example, if Leia goes from 8 warnings a week down to 7, you'll give her 1 extra credit point to counteract the deduction. Don't change the original numbers. The numbers tell a story. For the 3rd violation, the student is sent to the office. Honestly though, you might decide to only give the students 1 warning. That's the after-class conference with the teacher, and strike 2 is going to the office. You're going to want to consider a few things. You can't have the students sent to the office for every little infraction. The time when it may be appropriate to go down to only 1 warning is if you're finding you're giving warnings out all the time to the same students. You don't have to let the difficult students rack up points every day if you feel it's not productive. The point of the warning system is to inform and to teach students and help them behave differently. Those who don't get the message or are actively resisting are not going to benefit from an extra warning. It's not a punishment. It's just that these students already know the rules and they're not listening. Of course, you have to be picky with what qualifies as an infraction. Not every little wrong move needs to be marked, only if it's something that you see is disturbing the learning. Now about that last strike which sends the student to the office. Always make sure to send the student with an independent assignment or busy work. They're not going to the office to hang out. Also, this is a natural consequence too. The student needs to be cleared of distractions in the classroom in order to do the work. The administrator will check over the work that the student completed in the office, and you can only admit the student back into class when the busy work is done correctly and signed by the principal. And you also can ask the principal if they would be willing to fill out the antecedent behavior consequence form. Remember, you still have the right to have a student stay out for the rest of the class or the day if you think it's called for. As long as you feel it's necessary for the child and not because you want to get revenge, it does make sense. But don't continue keeping the child out the following day. That wouldn't teach the student anything. Of course, you'll have to use your best judgment in these situations, but note that you don't mutely have to accept the misbehaving student back to class that day just because the principal wants the kid out of his hair if you don't feel he's ready to go back. Also, not sending back right away sends a message to the other students that getting sent out is serious. Which reminds me, less is more. The less often you send students out, the bigger of a deal it's going to be when you have to send them out. Now let's discuss what happens to repeat offenders who were just sent to the office multiple times. We're going to use what's called a daily report card, or DRC. I've modified the program tremendously so we don't fall into the "I'll only work for a prize" trap that happens so often with behavior charts. You can call a meeting with the student and administrator, and I suggest you also include a parent. At this meeting, you discuss the data and discuss what results you want to see. The goal of the intervention is to address the cause of the behavior and create positive behavior substitutions. I'll cover this in Module 7.